Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Israel's Prime Minister sends Hamas an ultimatum: return all remaining hostages by Saturday or the ceasefire is over. Elon Musk defends his hostile cost-cutting measures as he slashes the spending of the US federal government. And US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth tells NATO it is a critical year for the Ukraine war as the third anniversary of the conflict approaches. Now, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has ordered military to gather forces inside and around the Gaza Strip. He's also warning intense fighting will resume and the ceasefire will end if Hamas doesn't release the remaining hostages. His comments came after a 4-hour meeting with the Security Cabinet, which also supports President Trump's demand for all hostages to be returned by noon on Saturday. Here's just what he had to say.
In light of Hamas's announcement of its decision to violate the agreement and not release our hostages, last night I ordered the military to gather forces inside and around the Gaza Strip. This operation is being carried out at this time. It will be completed in the very near future. If Hamas does not return our hostages by Saturday noon, the ceasefire will end, and the military will return to intense fighting until Hamas is finally defeated.
Can you tell? Following his comments, Israel's Deputy Foreign Minister Sharon Haskell spoke to Al Arabiya News. In an exclusive interview, she told us there's no reason for Hamas to continue to hold hostages and shared her thoughts on the future of the two-state solution. Take a listen.
Obviously, we are backing Trump's declaration asking to return all of the hostages. There's no reason for Hamas to hold our hostages and to prolong the situation. When we signed with Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, a ceasefire agreement, we knew we were signing a deal with a terrorist organization, and we knew they cannot be trusted. They violated the agreement from the start. For example, not giving us the list of the names of the people that are going to be released, or not until today, not giving the status of which hostage, in what condition they are. The fact that they didn't release Arbel Yehud, which she was meant to be released among the first one, was another violation, a brutal violation of the agreement as well. And now Hamas is coming and complaining about what we did because they didn't release Arbel Yehud, to wait with the returning of the Gazan citizen to the north until they release her, like they actually committed to. Well, it's absolutely unacceptable. I think that we cannot talk about it right now because we will not reward again the worst crime that was committed against the Jews since the Holocaust, the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, with a state. This would be actually like rewarding the worst terror act against our country. You know what we need to talk about? We need to talk about the Palestinian leadership. And we need a brave Palestinian to rise up and to actually say, I want to create a better future for my people. I accept the state of Israel will not go anywhere. And I want to find a solution when we can live side by side. When there's going to be a Palestinian leader that can say that in Arabic, not in English, but in Arabic, to its own people, that will be the first step about reconciliation and about building a bridge between the two people. But until now, there isn't a single Palestinian leader that can actually say.
We can now speak to our correspondent Giles Gibson in Tel Aviv. Giles, good evening to you and thank you for joining us. First of all, the Israeli Deputy Foreign Minister says it's backing Trump's declaration asking Hamas to return all the hostages. Can we expect the IDF to resume fighting if Hamas just doesn't obey these demands?
Well, I think the Deputy Foreign Minister's comments there really reflect the lack of clarity over exactly what the Israeli government's demands are to Hamas, because we've had some reports that the cabinet that met on Tuesday, the meeting taking 4 hours, voted unanimously to back the suggestion from the US President Donald Trump that Hamas should release all of the hostages on Saturday, not just 3 or 4 or 5. But if you look closely at Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister's statement that he gave almost exactly 24 hours ago, he says that if Hamas does not return our hostages, the ceasefire will end. The really important word in that sentence is are. That could reflect, yes, support of President Trump's idea that all of the hostages should be released. It could perhaps mean that just a handful of hostages are released, some sort of compromise reached between Hamas and the Israeli government. At this stage, it's just not clear.
So, Giles, is the Gaza ceasefire deal now at real risk of collapsing?
Well, it certainly is, and I think that's why we're seeing the diplomatic efforts behind the scenes, but also out in public, to try to keep this ceasefire deal alive before that ultimatum, which has been given by the Israeli Prime Minister, expires at noon local time on Saturday. You have a leader from Hamas, a senior official in Cairo in Egypt, taking part in talks there. We've also been hearing that the Qataris have been working very hard behind the scenes to try to bring the two sides closer together. And you also have at the same time this pressure campaign from the Trump administration in Washington. Steve Witkoff, the US Special Envoy for the Middle East, echoing some of his boss, the president's comments in relation to Hamas, saying that Donald Trump, the US president, expects something different to happen, and if not, there's going to be a big problem.
Yes, indeed, Giles. But the images of 3 emaciated hostages that were released last Saturday, they really shocked Israel and the world. Some are blaming Netanyahu for not agreeing to a ceasefire deal sooner. I know there have been protests outside the PM's house in Jerusalem today, but is there a feeling of growing discontent in Israel with the leadership and how the ceasefire is actually going?
Well, yeah, in addition to those protests outside the Prime Minister's house, we've also had some protests here in Tel Aviv with demonstrators blocking one of the major highways into the city. You also have the Hostages Families Forum, which represents families of hostages who were or still are held by Hamas in Gaza, really pleading with the government not to put the ceasefire deal in any danger, talking about exactly what you mentioned, the condition of the last round of hostages who were released, those images that went around the world of them looking emaciated or gaunt in very sort of tough conditions. And we also, at the same time, have voices coming out of Gaza, Gazans saying that there is fear, there's tension in the air as this clock ticks down towards that deadline, and they face the prospect of facing another Israeli offensive.
Yes, indeed, Giles. Giles, just shifting gears slightly, Egypt's President al-Sisi has actually issued an ultimatum to Trump. What does he have to say?
Well, that's not actually been publicly confirmed, but we've had these reports that President Sisi of Egypt has said to the Trump administration that he will not come to the White House if Trump's plan in terms of the US taking over Gaza is going to be on the agenda of that meeting. No comment yet about these reports from either the Egyptian presidency or indeed the Egyptian foreign ministry, but certainly officials in the presidency, in the foreign ministry, will have been watching as Jordan's King Abdullah took part in a meeting with President Trump at the White House on Tuesday, and he was put in this very difficult spot, really pushed into a corner, sitting next to President Trump in the Oval Office, asked repeatedly over about 20 minutes or so by reporters whether he supports Trump's vision for the future of Gaza, and he had to repeatedly dodge that question, evade that question, repeatedly saying that he is waiting for Egypt to set out what it says is going to be a comprehensive vision for the future of Gaza.
Giles Gibson in Tel Aviv, thank you so much for joining me this evening. Now, Tesla and SpaceX CEO Elon Musk has made a surprise first appearance at the White House alongside President Donald Trump. The tycoon, tasked by Trump to lead federal cost-cutting efforts through his Department of Government Efficiency, spoke to reporters in the Oval Office. He denied leading a hostile takeover of the government and defended his plans, warning that America would go bankrupt without them. Here's a reminder of what he had to say.
Your detractors, Mr. Musk.
I have to what?
Including a lot of Democrats.
I have detractors?
You do, sir.
I don't believe it.
Say that you're orchestrating a hostile takeover of government and doing it in a non-transparent way. What's your response to that criticism?
Well, first of all, people voted for major government reform, and that's what people are going to get. They're going to get what they voted for. We spend a lot of money on defense. But if that just keeps going, we're essentially going to bankrupt the country. So what I really want to say is, like, it's not optional for us to reduce the federal expenses. It's essential.
Let's get some reaction from Washington with our correspondent, Sara at Firth. Sara, thank you so much for joining me. Elon Musk was unsurprisingly given quite a grilling by reporters in his debut appearance, and he admitted he would make mistakes, like all of us, basically.
Yes, I mean, it was pretty remarkable scenes at the White House with billionaire Elon Musk joining President Trump in the Oval Office and facing for the first time those questions by reporters, and some pretty tough questioning too. Now, Elon Musk was saying to the reporters that, look, he is intending to carry out President Trump's plans for aggressively cutting back on federal government spending. He was questioned by the reporters, though, over some of the claims he made. They were saying, look, you've made these claims with regards to US aid and some of where the money's going. Those proved to be inaccurate when fact-checked. What do you have to say about that? And Elon Musk coming out and saying, well, look, some of the time, yes, I will be incorrect. It's right, you fact-checked. He wanted to really hammer home that this was about transparency, that it would all be going up online, going up on X. There are issues here, though, and one of the big issues is the fact that you have got Elon Musk, an unelected official himself, and you've heard those criticisms that Musk is carrying out some kind of hostile takeover. He's refuted that, but the fact of the matter is he is unelected and he is being given a huge amount of power by President Trump. And in those questioning, you know, he's holding his hands up saying mistakes will get made, but a critical point is the fact that he is unelected, and President Trump has been acting on those claims that Elon Musk makes. I mean, you saw them there shoulder to shoulder in the Oval Office. So it raises very big questions about the fact that President Trump is acting on these claims that Elon Musk himself is conceding won't always necessarily be accurate.
Yes, indeed, absolutely right. There seems to be a real bromance budding between both of them. But President Donald Trump also signed an executive order enforcing federal agencies to work with the US DOGE service to cut their existing workforce and limit future hiring. It's arguably the most explicit statement yet by the president that he supports these large-scale cuts to the federal workforce. What more do we know?
You're right, a bromance backed by an executive order, because that executive order, very serious. They're going to be seeking to slash, as we said, federal government spending, but that is going to be looking to radically reduce the workforce across federal government. And you also had in some of the detail of that executive order information like the fact that any new hirings in some of these departments, they will have to go through a Department of Government Efficiency representative that essentially hands this huge amount of authority to Elon Musk himself and to his Department of Government Efficiency. And that is where you're getting these criticisms of a hostile takeover, is once again, you know, Elon Musk is unelected. And so you've got a lot of noise being made in Washington right now about the level of power and the level of responsibility that President Trump is handing over to Elon Musk. So there are really big questions around this, but as you said, you know, that they're shoulder to shoulder. It's very clear that President Trump has put his trust in Elon Musk. Elon Musk there with his 4-year-old son. There were some light-hearted moments, but on a very serious topic. There are federal workers across the country right now, very, very concerned for their futures, what this will mean for their jobs. There are huge changes underway. There are going to be legal challenges. There are already legal challenges to some of these executive orders that President Trump is signing. But it really was quite a big moment there, having Elon Musk stood in the Oval Office with his young son, and President Trump putting so much power once again in his hands.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of uncertainty over the workforce in the US, as you said. But I just want to go back on and touch actually on Elon Musk's son. He was there. He kind of stole the show with his antics. He was picking his nose at one stage. What more do we know about his son and what he was up to in the Oval Office?
Well, President Trump describing Elon Musk's 4-year-old son, known as Little X. That's what Elon Musk has nicknamed him and how he's known to many across America. President Trump had called him a person of high IQ, so quite like his father, it's thought. But yes, there were some moments where even President Trump looked a little bit unsure about sharing the limelight with that young man. But it was a moment of brevity in what was a very serious topic, because of course you did have those reporters pushing very hard on the questioning. You have got these talks of the hostile takeover. Elon Musk, for his part, has said, look, there's nothing radical here. We're going to be transparent. He's there with his son. He's relaxed. At one point, he had Little X on his shoulders. They were enjoying that moment, and it was quite a moment with Elon Musk's son, you know, touching the Resolute desk. There's some incredible imagery that came out of that. And I think once again, it just really underscores, doesn't it, that level of trust, that level of relationship that Elon Musk and President Trump have reached. And it also speaks, I think, to, again, the questions over the authority and the power that billionaire Elon Musk, who is the head, the CEO of many companies, the level of authority he now holds, and where the checks and balances on that authority comes from, given that he is unelected. So it's ruffled a lot of feathers, that appearance in the Oval Office yesterday. And President Trump, for once, sharing the limelight, it seemed willingly, at least for most part.
Yes, indeed. I just want to shift gear quickly. And Trump has been hosting world leaders at the White House. We've seen pomp and ceremony going on. We know India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi is arriving today, and reports suggest their friendly rapport could actually be tested. What more?
It's going to be very interesting. So you've got Narendra Modi on this 2-day visit to Washington. It's expected he'll be meeting with President Trump in the White House on Thursday. Look, we saw in Trump's first term, they had a close relationship. They were friendly, they were warm, they were on the same page in many areas. There's a huge amount of business and trade that goes on between the two countries. You've got India, the highest spender in the US defense equipment. So there is a very close relationship here. There is a business relationship here. You've heard both sides seeming to signal that they'll want to continue that. But there are two big sticking points here. One is going to be trade. We know that President Trump is not happy about the American trade deficit with India. We know that he's not happy when it comes to the high import duty on goods that make it difficult to enter the Indian market. We've also got the issue of immigration. Now, Modi, for his part, has signaled that he's fully on board when it comes to President Trump's aggressive stance on illegal immigration, and that there will be full cooperation from India. Those are the kinds of comments that you can see clearly. He's trying to sweeten President Trump up a little bit, perhaps ahead of that official meeting between the two. They have had, up until this point, a friendly relationship. But what we're seeing from President Trump, his second term in the White House, is a more aggressive, more confident president. He is willing to play hardball, and he is putting his money where his mouth is this time, frankly, and making these executive orders, and not afraid when he's meeting these world leaders to be leading the charge. So it's going to be very interesting to see the details of what come out of that meeting between the two that have been on friendly terms until now. Can that continue with this more aggressive stance from Trump?
Time will tell, Sara Firth. Time will tell. Our correspondent in Washington, thank you so much for joining me. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. A Russian attack on Kyiv has left one person dead and injured three others, including a 9-year-old child. The early morning missile also sparked several fires in the city, according to Ukrainian officials. Kyiv Mayor Vitaly Klitschko said on Telegram that emergency services were called at least 4 districts of the Ukrainian capital. Canada has appointed a former deputy commissioner of the RCMP as the country's first fentanyl czar. Kevin Borosu also previously worked as Justin Trudeau's deputy national security and intelligence advisor. President Trump has threatened to impose tariffs from all Canadian imports until their government cracks down on the flow of fentanyl across the border. Now, the White House banned an Associated Press reporter from entering the Oval Office last night over the news agency's decision to keep using the name of Gulf of Mexico. It comes as President Trump renamed the coastline the Gulf of America. 2 unidentified journalists were turned away from the press evening, with a second AP staff member later blocked from the White House diplomatic room. AP's senior vice president and executive editor has called the move unacceptable and accused the Trump administration of violating the First Amendment. And a giant schnauzer has beaten over 2,500 other canines to be crowned best in the show at the 2025 Westminster Kennel Club Dog Show in New York. 5-year-old Monty is the first of his breed to win the prize since 2004. Bourbon, the Whippet, who came out of retirement for the event, was awarded the runner-up prize of Reserve Best in Show. To Brussels now, and US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has visited NATO today, becoming the first member of the Trump administration to do so. His appearance comes ahead of the 3rd anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine later this month, with Western allies keen to know where the US stands when it comes to the outcome of the war. President Trump has previously promised to end the conflict and has encouraged both sides to make a deal. Let's cross live to Brussels to speak to our EU correspondent, Jack Parrock. Jack, good evening to you. Actually, in the last few moments, we're hearing Trump and Putin have had a phone call for 1.5 hours and agreed to a time which has come together. What more can you tell us about this phone call and the latest developments?
Yeah, that's about all the information that we have at the moment, that this phone call has taken place. But it is very significant. Trump has said that he wants a quick peace deal, and direct talks with the Russian President Vladimir Putin are the most likely way to get that. The question is, what will that mean? Who will be involved in any future peace talks? What will that mean for the Ukrainians? They will be looking very closely into this. There's been a lot of action and discussions about what can happen in this area, and specifically here at NATO. As you say, Pete Hegseth, the new US Defense Secretary, he came to Brussels today to meet with his NATO counterparts, and he left no stone unturned. His tone was very clear about what the United States wants. Firstly, very clearly, that US opposition to Ukraine joining the NATO military alliance was clear under the Trump administration. That was something, talks for Ukraine to be a NATO member, they've been dangled as a suggestion that Ukraine could eventually become a NATO member, which is something that is absolutely out of the question for Russia, as it would bring the NATO border all the way up to the Russian border, which is something that the Russians feel that they were promised by NATO wouldn't happen. He also said that peace negotiations would have to take place, but the idea of returning to pre-2014 borders, for instance, when Crimea was part of Ukraine, that was, and he quoted, an unrealistic objective. So we've had this outline from Pete Hegseth here, and we've had this call between the Russian president and the US president, and there is going to be a lot of action, a lot of pressure here to see exactly what comes out of this. There's a lot of movement as well, a lot of meetings coming in the coming few days and weeks.
Yes, indeed. But this will be a major blow for Zelensky, won't it? What we're hearing here, especially about what Hegseth said about NATO. Have we had any reaction at all from the Ukraine side?
So the Ukrainians are trying to keep a relatively low profile. There was a press conference today, but the Ukrainian defense minister, alongside the British defense minister, who's sort of in charge of chairing the meetings, and their tone is relatively muted. So they want to keep a sort of a calm around this. They know what the Trump administration wants. They want this peace deal, and they want, as I said, no Ukrainian entry into the NATO military alliance. They don't want to change the borders, and they're saying basically that the Ukrainians. But the big question really is what will happen with Zelensky, right? That's the question now, because what he has is the Russian president, who is obviously against him, and now he has Donald Trump in the White House, who is also kind of against him and has spoken out against him. So the question is, will Zelensky now potentially start to be sidelined out of these discussions? And what will the NATO allies do in that case?
So, Jack, we're just hearing, actually, while we're on air and I'm chatting to you, reports are saying that Donald Trump is going to call Zelensky any moment now to tell him what he's discussed with Vladimir Putin. So, as you say, a lot of action and a lot of pressure. But Trump says the war is costing the American taxpayer just far too much money. But could brokering a really hasty deal, like you say, pressure, have significant long-term risks for Ukraine and its people?
It could. I mean, this is to do with the borders. Firstly, what does it mean? How far would the borders be changed? What is the Trump plan for that? As soon as I come off air from you, a lot of people like me will be immediately poring over the details of that potential call and whether there was a peace, there's any structure to this peace outline. This is what everyone wants to know. In the last few days, we saw the Trump administration appoint General Keith Kellogg to be his envoy for Ukraine and Russia. This man cannot breathe without the world's attention being focused on exactly what he says, because everybody wants to know what the US thinking behind that is. He is going to be at the Munich Security Conference. We know that. Zelensky's also going to be at the Munich Security Conference coming in the next few days. He's expected to meet J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, who has been frankly pretty, condemning of Ukraine. He said in the past that he doesn't care what happens to Ukraine. So we'll have to see what those meetings sort of amount to. There's a big triangulation now around that security conference and what could potentially come out of it. But the big thing has been, what will Trump do? Well, all of those meetings have been scheduled, and this call with Vladimir Putin, this is the thing that's going to shed light on it.
Jack, I think we've all been wondering what Donald Trump's going to do, but we'll definitely find out. Jack Parrock, EU correspondent in Brussels, thank you so much for joining me this evening. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. An American school teacher who was detained for more than 3 years in Russia has been welcomed back to the US by President Donald Trump. Mark Fogel was sentenced to 14 years in prison after he was arrested for traveling with medically prescribed cannabis. Trump said his release could be a big, important part of ending the war with Ukraine, but refused to say what the US had given in exchange. Just hours later, the Kremlin said that a Russian citizen was freed from a US prison. Now, one person has died and 25 others are injured after a high-speed train collided with a truck outside Hamburg. 6 people were said to be in a serious condition after the level crossing crash. A 55-year-old passenger died at the scene. The FBI has uncovered 2,400 lost files connected to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. President Trump had previously ordered all files relating to the 1963 shooting to be declassified. The head of the new task force on declassification of federal secrets believes 2 shooters were involved in JFK's assassination, contradicting official account that gunman Lee Harvey Oswald was solely responsible. And Pope Francis continues to suffer with a bout of bronchitis. During his weekly general audience at the Vatican earlier today, he asked an aide to read his remarks for the second time in 2 weeks. The 88-year-old has battled influenza and other health issues after taking over as pontiff in 2013. Tens of millions of pilgrims are flocking to the Kumbh Mela in India as the enormous religion event inches towards its ending. Wednesday is one of the most crucial days in the 6-week-long Hindu festival. Security has been beefed up after a crowd rush killed at least 30 people 2 weeks ago, as Ishnan Garg tells us from New Delhi.
Millions of people took a dip at the confluence of the 3 of the holiest rivers for Hindus on Wednesday as the Kumbh Mela festival continues. Officials are now tightening security at the Hindu festival amid allegations of mismanaging what's being called the biggest religious gathering anywhere in the world. Dozens of security checkpoints were set up, and additional police as well as paramilitary forces and helicopters were deployed to deal with the huge number of pilgrims that are now pouring in. Authorities are also now urging people to not flock to the main confluence point and instead use other stretches of the riverbank to take a customary dip that the devotees believe will absolve them of their sins. Now, this increased preparations and scrutiny comes as pressure has been building on Prime Minister Narendra Modi's BJP party over a stampede that killed at least 30 people 3 weeks ago. Bharatiya Janata Party, or the BJP officials, are now facing criticism for not planning entry and exit routes well as well. Some family members of those who had died in that stampede say they have yet to receive the compensation. At that point, the government says it is making all necessary efforts to address these concerns. Now, state officials had announced about $29,000 for the kin of the deceased, and some people are also complaining about being burdened with bureaucracy to receive this amount of money, including facing very long delays in getting death certificates from local officials. Now, religious scholars say this year's event is special because they say stars have aligned in a particular pattern after 144 years to make this Kumbh Mela more auspicious. That's because some 460 million people are already estimated to have attended the religious event, and that number could rise further as millions continue pouring in, believing this year's Kumbh to be the most significant religious event of their lifetime.
Ishnan Garg in New Delhi, thank you very much. Let's take a look at the top business news. US consumer prices increased more than expected in January. The latest data reinforces the Federal Reserve's message that it was in no rush to resume cutting interest rates amid growing uncertainty over the economic impact of the Trump administration's policy. The consumer price index jumped 0.5% last month. Coca-Cola may have to sell more drinks in plastic bottles in America if President Trump's tariffs end up making aluminium cans more expensive. That's according to the company's CEO, James Quincy. It comes after Trump ordered a 25% import tax on all steel and aluminium entering the US, which could drive up prices of canned food and drink items in the country. Heathrow has unveiled a new multi-billion-pound investment in its existing terminals ahead of the push for a third runway. The CEO of the UK's biggest airport, Thomas Walby, says the upgrade will be funded entirely by private investment. Walby also said he sees a third Heathrow runway by 2035. Let's turn to sports news now. Manchester City collapsed in the final stages of their Champions League playoff first leg against Real Madrid. Pep Guardiola's side were 2-1 up with 5 minutes to go at the Etihad, but they crumbled in the last moments to lose 3-2. Midfielder Jude Bellingham claimed a last gasp winner for Real Madrid. And one of England's most iconic football stadiums will host the Merseyside derby between Everton and Liverpool later on today. Goodison Park, which has been Everton's home since 1892, will be demolished after this season. The club is moving to a new venue at Bramley Moor Dock on Liverpool's waterfront. A reminder of our top stories. Israel's Prime Minister sends Hamas an ultimatum: return all remaining hostages by Saturday or the ceasefire is over. Elon Musk defends his hostile cost-cutting measures as he slashes the spending of the US federal government. And some breaking news. President Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin say they've spoken for an hour and a half and will visit each other's countries. It comes as US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth tells NATO it's a critical year for the Ukraine war as the third anniversary of the conflict approaches. And that's all from us on W News. Thank you so much for joining us. Coming up next, Riz Khan meets the Latvian Prime Minister, followed by Melinda Nafora's special interview with Israel's Deputy Foreign Minister, Sharon Haskell. And of course, don't miss Tom Burgess-Watson with GNT. But good night and thank you for joining me.